The Bill Clark Show, presented by Dr. Pepper. And now, Coach Bill Clark.
Welcome in. It's the Coach Bill Clark Show. Coach Bill Clark, along with Landrum Roberts, Molly Robinson. I'm Pat Smith. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to dive into all sorts of fun topics, Coach. I want to go back to the previous 3 episodes. Just incredible content. And if you've missed any of it, I encourage people to go back on our YouTube page or the podcast page and download it, because, you know, your insight over what took place with you taking the UAB job, the shutdown, and the return, it was really special.
Yeah, I've had tons of folks reach out to me, you know, compliments, you know, of course, give Molly compliments for putting all this together. But I think if you really want to encapsulate prior to the return and the return, I thought those were 3 really good episodes. It kind of gives you a chance to really get behind the scenes of it.
And that was the premise of this, right? This whole show conceptually, Coach, is not only the X's and O's and very comprehensive. You're not going to get better information during the college football season, but also year round, taking you behind the scenes, a peek behind the curtain to see what it is like in running a program at a high level.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what we did. What did it really look like? You know, how bad was it? And kind of where did we end up going? Of course, we could talk on and on and on, but I think it does give people a taste.
All right, so here we are, this calendar part of the year. Most of us are talking basketball, and we'll get your opinion on that a little bit later. But in regards to being a football coach right now, Alabama is in spring practice. They're taking this week off because of spring break. They're going to be back at it next week. Auburn's going to be a couple more weeks before they get going. Where would you be right now in regards to your team at least 1 week into spring practice?
Yeah, so, you know, we had talked a lot about the training and how important that was. I've seen more people going doing stadium steps and coaches on the field. That was the best kept secret for us. You know, I felt like, hey, every Friday we're not going to wait. You know, of course, you've heard of Nick Saban's fourth quarter, and there was times when these coaches got out there with them. Obviously, the rules have changed. Used to, you're so worried, you know, don't get a football out there. Now you can. There's OTA, so there's a whole different thing. But that time between January and spring was so crucial. I've seen more coaches start to understand that. You know, we've talked a lot about Army, how they train their guys so hard in the offseason that goes straight to the field. Now, all that's passed. Here we are at spring. What does the first week look like for spring? You know, I think getting ready for that is so important. But I think for me, it was always that was a time for physicality. That was a time for run, play, action, pass. Same thing with the defense. And then, of course, I want to get all my special teams in as well.
I found it funny, Coach Bill Belichick, and he was in a different situation and coming in from the NFL and taking over that job in Chapel Hill. But during their spring practice, no numbers,
right?
No names. It's just dudes that are out there. As far as personnel, and now I guess it is a little bit different because of the transfer portal, and you have a lot of additions right before or a couple of months before spring practice starts, Coach. But how well-versed were you personally, and how well-versed are a lot of these coaches on personnel, and exactly who are they looking at and where?
I've had multiple coaches say, you know, I need some advice on what it's like to start the roster over. And I thought that was funny. I had a coach I talked to yesterday, in fact, was, you know, he's a college coach. He said, Coach, what was it like? I said, what you're in is really, we were in that, you know, bringing all these transfers in. You don't know these guys, so you've got to start at the basics. And, of course, that's what spring's for, fundamentals. That's what still wins to me. But getting to know your people, getting to know your personnel, and that's why, to me, it was so much good on good. I mean, that's what's fun. You know, I spent every second of every day talking about staying off the ground because we were physical without tackling to the ground minus your 3 scrimmages of the spring. So you're looking at personnel. You're going 1-on-1s. You're going 2-on-1s. You're taking the third-string guy and put him with the ones. All those things. So how do we evaluate personnel in the time when we can really be physical, which is spring?
In regards to spring practice and spring games, I know there's been a lot of talk over the last couple months on whether coaches and teams should participate. If you were coaching UAB or any program right now, what would be your philosophy?
Yeah, we probably wouldn't do it. I mean, anything, and this is what I've said a zillion times, my job is to always be a salesman to my program. Always. We're always selling. You know, it's like we talk about Birmingham. You know, I was talking about before the show about Birmingham, and I always talk about why say Birmingham's not great. It is great. The people are great. Well, same thing with, you know, we were at UAB or Jack State. We're selling the program. But if it becomes a competitive disadvantage, for people to sit there in the stands and film us, okay, that was one. Okay, we're all going to just not show a lot. But now they're going to go in there and look at my players and pick over my players, especially when I've got, and you're seeing it from guys with money. Imagine I'm at a deficit, and I'm going to let you come in there and look at my players when there's a portal about to open up, and you can go get them and offer them X amount of money. So no, I would be in agreement with that, because you're still going to get everything else. That is really strictly for the fans, and they're fixing to get all they want of you come fall.
What is the most useful, and this can cover a lot of stuff, but you're a training guy. That's your background. What were some of the more useful drills that you found in the offseason that were instrumental, not only physically, but maybe mentally in preparing your team?
Prior to spring?
Yes.
I think everything is competition. Every time I can put two guys competing against each other, because what are we looking for is here's the line, and I've said this so many times, do you run to the line or do you run through the line? And so many guys, they want to, it's me and Pat racing each other, and I want to worry about what Pat's doing. It's okay to help that make you be more competitive. But when I slow up or let down based on the fact Pat's in front of me, that's losing mentality. So how do I teach them that it's not even a thought to let up? We're running a 40-yard dash, we're running a 50-yard dash. Now, you turn every drill into competitive drills, but I think there's a ton of drills you can do. Now, when I say skill work, I used to talk about skill work all the time. This was non-ball related, okay? I don't have a ball on the field. How many skills O-line? Everybody's skills without a football. Now, a quarterback really needs a football. Receivers still have to run routes. Quarterback's one of the few guys that needs a football to do his job. Everybody else, we found all these skills they can do without it. So O-line, coming off and doing all these things you can do. How do we teach tackling without tackling? That's the things we're looking for, and I could go into it, but competitive drills that mimic their position. And, of course, now we can get a football out with OTAs and stuff, so that's a little different.
How are we teaching tackling without tackling?
Yeah, so things we're doing is, all right, where are you putting your – and granted, obviously there's going to be a little bit of touching there, but – I'm seeing what I'm hitting. I'm using a guy in front of me to mirror him. I'm sitting on the back side.
Are we thudding up?
We're walking through a tackle. Yes, it's a walk through. Then we maybe roll a big ball at them, let them come down low. And we used to call this in youth football throwing the bowling balls. Throw those balls, sink your hips, head up. Big thing for us, we always talk about safety. So we're always talking tackling. I talk to guys all the time about being a tackling expert. That's something we're always talking about. What does that look like? How am I mirroring this guy? Where's my head placement? My eyes are always up. My hips are sunk. I'm throwing these bowling balls. And then I'm talking about locking up. I may be locking up. I may be using a ball. I'm rolling a ball, and they've got to sink their hips and lock up on this ball. So that's the great question. How do we teach skills where there's not contact, without a ball? Where's my placement? How am I tracking the backside hip where the guy doesn't cut back on me? All those things.
I'm not asking for names. If you want to give names, we always welcome that. Your openness on this show is well received.
Names, Coach, names.
But I'm just curious, in all your years of coaching, even back in Prattville, was there a particular kid, student athlete that maybe at the beginning of spring looked a certain way, but by the time you got to the 15th practice, that all of a sudden your depth chart and your plans for the fall dramatically changed based on that particular player's ability and what he showed you in spring?
Gosh, I wish I had a great example of because, there's two times you think of spring and then you think of summer camp. Right. Maybe you got a freshman in. Mm-hmm. I remember Spencer Brown. Let's go back to Spencer Brown. Now, that was a summer camp, but here's a guy who had been a linebacker his whole career. We get him to come to camp on the grass field behind the old crappy dentist office we talk about.
Bowman building field.
Yep. He's back there at a camp. I've just got there in 14, and he runs a 4.57.
Was that Mortimer Jordan?
Yes. He'd only played running. They get him in running back in the playoffs, and he rushes for 300 yards a couple weeks in a row, and all of a sudden he's a running back. But he'd been a linebacker. And we said, you're offered. And so please nobody else find out about this guy. And we get him, and he comes into camp, and we had some running backs in front of him. We had some good ones. We went and recruited some. You're like, oh my gosh, this guy is the real deal. But spring was such a fun time for me to get to see these guys. The big thing for us, we'd make them in a lot of, I say a lot of people, some people do it. We're going to come through the line and say, hey, I don't hate you, because they have fought against each other.
Right.
Every single day. The big thing was, how do you keep them from killing each other? To be that competitive, And I know that didn't necessarily answer, but I think, yes, guy used to love to see, and you're going, wow, this guy. Because you've seen some of that in the offseason, but till you see it with the pads on, it's different.
When you had dust ups, you had guys that were tying up, and what you're talking about is physically. There's a lot of emotion in there, and they get tied up, they get to fighting. How long would you let that go?
You don't
or is
let
that
it
just
go. Yeah. I think that's a great question, because what happens, and I used to, back in the old days, it was like, man, we want to see these guys fight, but to me, that was one of those things that was going to happen naturally. We were so competitive, and it was so many good on good drills. How do we keep them from getting hurt? Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, you got one guy in it, and all of a sudden, you got 5 and 6, and no, you leave the sideline, it's like a game. It's bad. But I mean, it was so intense. Our practices were, and I'm sure there's were others, but ours were so intense. It was a constant me being the referee and staying in the middle of it. Offensive, because the offensive defense coaches every drill's competitive. It's third downs, it's red zone, it's coming out, it's goal line, it's skeleton, it's pass rush. And they're going against the same guy. So then you'd go ones on ones, and then we go twos on ones.
Not necessarily with your staff, but I did hear a story recently about 2 coordinators who at one time worked together, and they were going, against each other every single day in practice at a major program. How tough was it with those offensive and defensive coaches going against each other? Would you have to separate them at times?
Yeah, you've had a little bit of the jawing, and of course, my job was to say we'd never have, but you do. You're going to have it. First, these guys are ultra competitors. That's the world they're in. Secondly, I'm overlooking the whole thing. So, it would invariably be the offense would dominate. The next day, the defense. I mean, because those guys they've watched that video and been basically berated. I mean, you missed this block or tackle, you weren't inside out. They wanted it more than you did. And then the next day, flip. And then you got the scrimmage. Because I promise you, the group of coaches that didn't do well, they are not happy. They are down. They've just been embarrassed. And so usually you'll see that flip. But, I mean, I've seen coaches, that's why we always talk about not coaching somebody else's players other than the coordinator, but he's always usually got a position. And I always said, leave that to me, And, of course, we always want to get on the situation, the number. I had a guy say, Coach, you were always big on not breaking a guy down. I didn't like that, where I'm attacking him. It was, you didn't do this. Now, if it was effort, that's different. But we can always give better effort. But, yeah, it was very competitive to your question.
Donahue Chevrolet, one of our fine sponsors, saw you driving in the parking lot. Landrum and I were out helping some folks out in the parking lot, and you came in there on 2 wheels on that Donahue Chevrolet Tahoe.
Yeah, first Donahue, in my time at UAB, they were such great sponsors of our program, but they've got great Chevy vehicles. They've got a ton of other vehicles. We got great Chevy vehicles, and I love my Tahoe, and really, my daughter bought one, so we're big fans of Donahue and that vehicle.
Coach, it is March Madness. I'm curious. I made a faux pas many, many years ago in my career. I know it's hard to believe.
I know
but I did. Rick Neuheisel was a guest on the Paul Feinbaum show. Yeah, Rick's a great guy. Rick, when he was the head coach at the University of Washington, got into a little trouble because back when the NCAA was a real thing, he decided that, hey, we're going to have March Madness office bracket.
Right. Seems like I remember that.
What's the harm? Well, NCAA at that time, they frowned upon the fact that, you can't do that. It's against the rules. So he got in trouble. Mm-hmm. And so I called him to get him on the Paul Feinbaum show. And this is literally minutes before he comes on the show. And I'm like, hey, Coach, what's going on? Doing good? Okay, great. I said, man, how's your bracket looking? Pat, I was suspended, right, for doing that. I don't do that any longer. And I was like, I wanted to crawl underneath the control room board. And then, of course, Paul's looking at me like, what is going on?
You can't play it off like I'm kidding because the guy was fired for it.
And, I mean, I'm just like, oh, my gosh, this is going to be a very bad interview. And to Coach Neuheisel's credit, he was first class.
Yeah.
Always had a good relationship with Coach, moving forward. But it was just like one of those times that it's March Madness, and, like, I'm just not thinking about everyone's got a bracket. Right. Now, I'm not going to ask you if you ever had a bracket while you coached.
Did you wheel the TV in at Prattville High School, let the kids watch?
No.
No?
Nope. Sorry.
But did you, as a coach, and I knew you were probably going through spring.
And didn't do a
I'm not
bracket
asking-
either, so.
Now, I'm not asking you if you did a bracket, but I am asking you, as a coach and as a competitive person, did you and your coaching staff ever enjoy like watching March Madness together if you weren't going through spring practice? I mean, was that
Sure,
something-
yeah, sure. Of course. I mean, it would probably, there would be times when it would be on as long as, based on what we were doing, and I would come into offices and it would be amazing. Other things besides plays were on there sometimes, like golf, or I was always wondering why is that up there instead of a video of our opponent or something. But anyway, there was a life outside of our team.
The tournament, there's so many different angles that we could go here. But we did talk about personnel, problems, managing things. Chad Baker Mazara of Auburn.
Right.
You've watched Auburn this year. He is a player that is polarizing, has trouble at times controlling his emotions. He has been ejected at least from 2-3 games. I know
I think
of.
3.
Chad Baker Mazara, you've had to have dealt with a personality or two like that in your time as a head coach.
Yep.
You got to have them. They're valuable. They're
Yep.
talented.
Yep.
But can we eliminate the flagrant fouls,
Yep.
the technical fouls? Got to have you out there. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I've dealt with a lot of that, and I think the guys that are on the edge who are playing so hard, and a lot of times those guys off the court, and I can't speak for him. He could be crazy, he can be off the court, or I don't know, so I can't speak to that. But I know Bruce Pearl, and I think I always go look at the coach, and then I say, okay, I'm sure this guy usually is a great guy. He practices hard, and he cares so much. That's what a lot of times we see as a coach, and he brings an edge to our team. Now, it's when you go past that line. It's always funny for us because ours was he's inside the lines, the whistle hadn't blown, we hit him. It was real simple. He steps out of bounds, we don't hit him. That's called being a smart player. But you're going to hit a guy and he jumps out, and I'm just using that for example. He jumps out of bounds and you hit him. What's a 15-yarder? And every fan says, "Oh, you're reckless," or whatever. And you're like, "Wait a second," So where's the line? What did he do? But now here's where I change. When he starts maybe beating you, that's different. Then as the coach, you got to say, "Look, you're not controlling yourself enough. I can't play you, or I've got to cut your minutes." So I think that's where the coaching comes in. But having a guy, especially in football, that's on the line sometimes, they're really good players. They're very competitive. They make us better, and sometimes we live with that.
Yeah. I was going to say, I'm not defending him.
Sure.
I just know that it's easy for us fans. We can watch from the comfort of our home and look and go, well, just don't respond. But it's the heat of action. It's competition.
right.
You got competitive drive, and this
Yep.
guy's been doing Lord knows what to you for the rest of the game that nobody's been able to see. I think that's curious, though, just the way that you describe that, because every college coach probably deals with it to some degree or another.
Yeah, Pat, Jim.
Well, I was just going to say, with that particular basketball team, I mean, that's the personality of the team. I'm not saying the personality of the team is to play dirty, because I don't consider them a dirty team.
No.
But his emotion, it not only feeds the rest of that basketball team, but when you're playing in Neville Arena, it feeds the beast there, and you want a guy like that. I mean,
Listen,
I think about
exactly.
the great line from A Few Good Men.
Yes.
Like, you need me on that line, and I think that's what Chad Baker Mazara does for that basketball team.
Hell, we were that team. We were that team, and somebody said, "Well, you're getting penalties." We're not trying to get penalties, and we would talk about it. I mean, now there are those teams that that you go, "Well, they don't get any penalties." Granted, if I've got the perfect team, I want them to be animals who are, 130 IQs and can hit a guy right on time. Sometimes you get another guy who's got all these other things, but he's lacking in that, or he's a little too aggressive, but that's who we got. We also, when we talk about I could do a whole show on unbelievable effort. What does that look like when you're playing through the whistle in football? That's what we say, play through the whistle. When you care and you're working your butt off and all those things. And I want an intense, like how Auburn plays. I mean, they're going to get their hands on you. They're going to be physical with you, which is what I call as good defense and intensity. you're going to have some of that. So not defending because I can't tell you about everything this guy's done, but I know I've lived in that world. It was so funny with us when we were 3 straight years in the top 10 and 15th my last year, but we had some penalties. And have guys going, man, I think they'd love some of those penalties right now. And that's no offense to UAB, but it was like intense, aggressive. I mean, you walk in my building, my guys, people be like, man, your guys. They say yes, sir, and no, sir. And they open the door for people, and it's a family. I'm like, no, my guys know how to act. But when we get out here, love and war, and it ain't love.
Without knowing the individual, as you said, you don't know his background, his history, what it's like with him off the court with Coach Pearl. But you're about to take your team to an SEC tournament.
Yeah.
You know what's on the line.
Yep.
Top seed, NCAA tournament. You know what happened last year in the first round versus Yale. You could have used him. He got ejected from the game.
Right.
What conversation is Bill Clark having with Chad Baker Mazara?
Yes, that's a constant. Let me tell you what. Look where you've got yourself in trouble, where you beat us. When do you get past that line? And I think that's one of the things we're looking for with a guy like him. What causes him to get in that? And it's like as soon as I see you doing it, you're out. If I see you getting to this point, and we have those guys. I've coached those guys. I'm like, your position coach is watching you. If I see some other guy, because here's what happens: your opponents have now figured this out. That's what people don't understand. We'd have guys. I had a really good D lineman named Garrett Marino, and I text him this right now and tell him he knew it. He was on the edge to what people would do because he was so aggressive and such a good player and tough and mean. They were going to grab him. They were going to grab him in the piles. And I'm like, wait a second now. But he's created some of that by being that guy. But some of it, they're also taking advantage of it. And that's what I talked to the officials about. You got to be looking for this now. They're trying to take advantage of it. But you also got to tell your player, look, they're trying to bait you.
Was there a set discipline? I know in high school we had APAs, after practice awards is what we called them. You got a penalty on a Friday night.
Yep.
Monday after practice, everybody had gone in. You did your portion of your APAs. Did you guys have those?
100%. Yeah, there's consequences.
Was there varying degrees of APAs?
I think if you start getting into what we would consider, all penalties really are considered dumb. But if I thought it was something that was just a total lack of discipline or something like that, I ended up having to remove a guy one time, won't say who it was, over how he interacted with the officials, which led to the strength coach, that led to a physical altercation. I'm sorry, but these are, you got to have rules and you got to have things, and mine is always what we're trying to take care of the player. What's best interest of the player? What's best interest of the team? Now, if that crosses a line, you just can't be with us if that's the case. That was rarely the case, though.
We're talking about being smart. Good thing to know is the people at SmartBank.
Yeah, and I think we've said so many things about SmartBank, but I think the thing that stood out was at an advisory meeting yesterday is small town banking feel. These are people that are going to know who you are. They're going to return your phone calls, and so if you call, if you got a question, they're going to get back to you. They're going to get back to you in a timely manner. We're seeing tons of people come over to SmartBank because they love the small town feel of SmartBank.
And speaking of another great sponsor of the show, and it's a great Alabama company, and I'm talking about Global Canine Protection Group. Those guys do a phenomenal job.
Yeah, Landrum and I was just talking about them off the air, but you've got, you're going to go to a game, you're probably going to see them there. They're with pro teams, they're with college teams, they're with our airlines, and they support our veterans. So they're doing some really cool stuff. These dogs can smell a bomb, a gun, all the things we want to do to be kept safe. So we appreciate their sponsorship, what they do.
Coach Safely is an outstanding organization that was established a few years ago. And for those that are watching and listening to this podcast, most people have heard of Coach Safely and how important of an organization it is. But for those that may be new to our community, just kind of discuss what Coach Safely does for not only the community, but of course the young people in this state and the coaches.
Yeah, what a great organization. And of course, I've been the vice president all the way back probably 2015. Jack Crow, who we had on the show, former coach at Auburn, head coach at Arkansas, Jack State, who I followed, started this organization. Jimmy Lee with Buffalo Rocks on this board, Dr. Jimmy Andrews. We passed a law a few years ago to get coaches trained for youth. This is youth sports. It's all boys and girls. Grades 1 through 7 is really who we're dealing with, but it is a coach's course to teach them about proper safety procedures, give them access to trainers, all the things that we want our youth coaches to know. Alabama passed a law, Jabba Wagner helped put it up, that they're required to take this course. So from a safety standpoint, from training our coaches on best practices is so great. I'm fixed to be the president. Drew Ferguson, who was our president, was a great man, UAB trainer, one of my favorite people, passed away a few months ago, and so I'm gonna move up to the president's role. But we got all kind of great people in that organization. It's one of these things where Alabama took the lead on youth sports safety by passing this law.
Is there any, and you don't have them right offhand, but I'm sure that you probably got some analytics and statistics since this stuff was implemented where you've seen some of these cases take a drastic decrease.
Yeah, I mean, I think, remember when Jimmy Andrews put that about pitching? You remember that when that came out about you should not be pitching year round? It was so important for that to come out for me because I'm like trying to show my baseball coach, look, let them play sports that are in season. They don't need to throw a baseball year round. That's the kind of data that is coming out of what we're doing. And with Alabama leading the way, now Arkansas has passed the law. We've got Texas looking at the law. So it could end up being national. We think it will. But, and I don't want to talk about just the injury side of it. We want to talk about prevention. How do we keep our kids safe? How do we train our coaches? And then there's the techniques. You were talking about tackling. That's part of those things. So there's techniques that coaches can do that injure them. Because here's what I want. I want to do it so they'll play. That's what we want. So kids will play. And if mama feels good about it and dad feels good about it and they know they're safe and we got access to trainers and doctors, why not let them play?
Well, I can speak firsthand because I was very involved coaching in Trussville for many years in the youth programs. And once that became a staple, I think we were one of the first communities to adopt it. And so I went through the program multiple years, and we would make our coaches in the baseball park go through it. And it wasn't like, okay, just go take this little online thing. And you sat in a class and you had speakers and you had to make sure that you could recognize concussion protocol. Right. You had to recognize, the arm safety and different things of that nature.
Illness.
Absolutely. Knowing when to back off and do things like that from a health standpoint. So I'm walking proof that class helped not only myself, but many coaches in the community.
Yeah, I really think it's a no-brainer. And we're fixing to kick off a campaign where we really start pushing. We're trying to get to 100%. It's just, it makes too much sense for these communities, where people are out on youth fields or, maybe it's a junior high, maybe it's a park in town where we got coaches, because man, we appreciate these coaches. A lot of these are parents. These are people that are giving back. We just want to make sure they're trained in the right way.
And especially in these rural areas. We think about Metro Birmingham and some of the colleges and universities that are actually high schools in their programs. And they're very impressive. But a lot of other parts of Alabama and around the country where it's easy not to notice these folks, but they're having to deal with a lot of the same things. They're going through the same practices.
Yeah, and best practices. What's the latest and greatest ways to train and teach kids? Because if you don't have a heart for kids, and that's why I got into coaching. And that's what you guys love. Somebody taught that to you. You've gotten to coach. So let's give them best practices. Let's give them the safest practices, so they will play.
True. I wanted to be that dad that was going to be a dad at the ballpark. Yeah. And very quickly I saw that the coaching that was being done, I'm not talking about X's at all. I'm just talking about the overall safety. Yeah. And that's why I started getting involved. And then when Coach Safely came along, it was just good to see that the priorities were being put in its proper perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's what it is. It's just have the right priorities. Let's get them out there and let's play. Let's just make sure we've trained them. We've got the law passed, and now we need to take a step and let's get everybody trained. And I think it really is about to take a national turn.
Well, Coach Safely, we will talk a good bit about that throughout the next few months as he takes over the presidency. So,
congratulations, Coach.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
Mr. President.
Yes.
Do we need to start calling him Mr. President now?
Yes.
You probably would.
Yeah, I like that.
Next time, we're going to get into how many fish you didn't catch down in the Gulf of America.
One that got away. It's always the biggest one.
Yeah. Gulf of America.
Gulf of America.
Jimmy Lee, Buffalo Rock, another fine sponsor, our title sponsor here at the Bill Clark Show.
Yeah, Jimmy Lee, Dr. Pepper, thank those guys. And Jimmy Lee, big sponsor of Coach Safely from the very jump. And he's so philanthropic. Appreciate the guys at Buffalo Rock and all they do, especially with Coach Safely.
Download the Bill Clark podcast each and every week, wherever you get your podcasts. Listen to it right here on Jocks 94.5. Watch it on YouTube. See Landrum Roberts each and every week here on the program. For Molly, Landrum, Coach, I'm Pat. Have a great week.
This has been the Bill Clark Show, presented by Dr. Pepper.